Our chalice lighting words this morning are from the Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg in her essay, Forever Connected. No matter how despairing or cut off we can feel at any given time, we are not actually severed from the essential flow of life or from one another. If we get quiet for a while and pay careful attention, this is what we realize. I will now light the chalice to begin our service. Good morning on this beautiful last day of May. I'm Martha Sinkula, and I'm going to be your service leader today. Welcome to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist congregation. I know it's especially important for us all to stay connected during this difficult time, and I hope all of you are doing well, taking care to be safe. Those in our congregation receive a mailing list. The mailing list receives weekly newsletter regarding our Sunday services and general information about our congregation. Facebook and YouTube carry our weekly sermons. Contact information can be found at the end of the service as well on our Facebook page. We hope that those who are new to us will check us out. Our speaker today is Dennis Reynolds. He came to the ministry after a 30-year career as a preschool teacher and administrator at the University of Oregon. He has since retired to Eugene after serving churches in Oregon and Washington State as a hospital chaplain. He has been an activist locally and globally. Reverend Dennis believes that the most powerful sermons are often those written with a religious text in one hand and a current news source in the other. He enjoys lifelong learning and the practice of crafting sermons.
We are, by our very nature, loving and caring beings. Yet sometimes we forget. We come together as a religious community to help us to remember.
Please join us singing number 100, Peace Like a River.
The spoken part of our meditation this morning comes from the Reverend Teresa Soto. Everything changes, even changes. Breathing in pain, breathing out care. Breathing in pain, breathing out compassion. Breathing in fear, breathing out belonging. Breathing in greed, breathing out healing. Breathing in uncertainty, breathing out connection. Breathing in pain, breathing out never, ever stop. Breathing in and breathing out. In and out together. Let's take one large shared collective breath in and out as we move into a time of shared silence, which will then be followed by song.
Our reading today is entitled For a Nurse by John O'Donohue. In this fragile frontier place, your kindness becomes a light that consoles the brokenhearted, awakens within desperate storms that oasis of serenity that calls the spirit to rise from beneath the weight of pain, to create a new space in the person's mind where they gain distance from their suffering and begin to see the invitation to integrate and transform it. May you embrace the beauty in what you do and how you stand like a secret angel between the bleak despair of illness and the unquenchable light of spirit that can turn the darkest destiny towards dawn. May you never doubt the gifts you bring. Rather, learn from these frontiers, wisdom for your own heart. May you come to inherit the blessings of your kindness and never be without care and love when winter enters your own life.
In my dream, I was lying in my bed, unable to move. My breath was slow and labored. I looked around the room and could not determine where I was. Things were very foggy. The fog was illuminated by a bright white light. At the edge of my vision were clock faces and dials. Tubes were protruding from my body. The whole scene looked like something I was in a Borg cube in a Star Trek episode. Resistance was futile. At the edge of the fog moved a being, human mostly in appearance, but short and orange-hued and clothed in rainbow cloth. I was reminded of the Oompa Loompas from the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, if anyone remembers that. The being moved closer to me, not via strides, but rather floating or rolling across the floor. They came close, whispering reassurance, calming me by their soft tone and stable presence. They moved around the room, attending to the clocks and dials, and then returned to my side. They stayed with me as I drifted back to sleep. When I awoke into the real world, what I saw had much in common with my dream. I was indeed in a light-filled room. There were dials on the wall, especially on the wall behind my bed. I was tethered and attached. with an IV drip in my left arm. Small rubber tubes hung from a port in my left chest. There was another tube between my right ribs. I later learned it was draining fluid from my chest cavity. Things were definitely foggy as my mind was dulled and my cognition slowed from medications and from what I later discovered was a significant systemic infection. I was in the intensive care ward at St. Joseph's Hospital in Bellingham, Washington, where I had been for 4 days. I had missed those 4 days altogether because I'd been sedated and intubated. I had been on a ventilator. Recent reports during this time of pandemic over a concern over the supply of ventilators to sustain COVID-19 patients reminds me that if it were not for the availability of such technology, I clearly would not be here today. Back then, nurses and other staff greeted me upon my return to groggy consciousness. Yet none looked quite like my nighttime visitor. The main day shift nurse was tall and lean. The bearded night shift guy, after hearing of my description of my nighttime visitor, showed up at his next shift wearing a rainbow-hued scrubs. But he was not the same being as the angel who had appeared in my dream, and yet perhaps they were not so very different. The nurses gifted me with excellent care and made real the sense of calm I had previously experienced in my dream. With the help of medications, they eased my pain and my anxiousness. This morning, I want to honor and celebrate such individuals, medical personnel, the angels who serve every day, and especially in these tenuous times, serve the cause of love, life, and compassion. I also want to pause this morning just briefly to honor all those who have kept us going and keep us going in these difficult times. Grocery store clerks, delivery people, food harvesters and preparers, but in particular medical staff, especially nurses, who I believe truly are angels. Angels who dwell among us here on earth, those who courageously and righteously help us to recover from injuries, to fight against illness, in our time to face the virus. May 5th was International Nurses Day, a time to honor nurses who are the true front line of medical work. The essayist and novelist Brian Doyle shares the following recollection. He says, "The first time I saw a nurse was when I was 4 years old and someone cut my tonsils out. And I woke up addled to find a cheerful woman wearing white leaning over me and murmuring something gentle. The room was all white, the bed was all white, and there were white curtains framing the window. I thought I had died and was in heaven, and the woman leaning over me was an angel. I was deeply relieved to be in heaven because I had recently sinned grievously, and my brother still had a black eye. For a moment, I wondered if the woman smiling at me was the Madonna, but then I remembered the Madonna wore blue. The woman leaning over me then said gently, 'Everything will be all right,' which it was after a while, during which I discovered that I was not dead, and she was a nurse." He continues, "But for me, ever since, nurses are essentially angelic. And even now, I'm deep into my 50s and I have lived long and seen much. I've never yet been disabused of the notion that nurses are gentle and witty and brilliant and holy beings who bring light and peace, even though I know they must have dark nights when they are weary and sad and thrashed by despair like a beach by a tide. I've seen nurses help bring my children out of the sea of their mother and into the sharp and bracing air of this world. I have seen nurses praying by my tiny son's bed before and after his heart was edited so he could live to be a lanky and testy teenager today. I've seen nurses grappling cheerfully with the wires and coils and tubes and plugs and buttons and toggles and keyboards of vast machinery beyond my ken. I've seen nurses with blood on their blouses in the nether reaches of the night in an emergency room. I've seen nurses hold my children's head as my children were sick upon their shoes. And never a snarl did I hear from those nurses, but only a soothing sound deep in the throats, a sound far more ancient than any civilization. I have friends of mine who are nurses, and I've heard them speak eloquently and articulately about their work as witness, as story saving, as patience and endurance, as being those souls who stand by the door between life and death and usher other people through it in both directions. I have quietly gaped in awe at the sinewy courage and flinty strength and oceanic graces of nurses, and many times considered what our hospitals and hospices and clinics and schools and our lives would be like without them, which is to stay starker and colder and more brittle and fearful. We would be even more alone and scared than we are now when faced with pain and confusion. Here this morning, in this dreamlike time of the pandemic, yet too real time as well, let us pause, and I suggest we answer Doyle's invitation to pray for them. To pray in the holy cave of our mouths and thank the mercy for these most able and skillful agents of his dream, of divinity's dream for us. That we will rise to love and joy, that we will achieve humility, that we will shape our humor and labor and creativity into lives that are prayers in motion. Prayers applied to salve and solve the pain of our companions on the road. Let us, in short, pray not only for the extraordinary smiling armies of nurses amongst us, let us pray to be like them, sinewy and tender, gracious and honest avatars of love. Amen to that. The metaphor of nurses as real-life angels is what led me to title my sermon this morning as Angels in America. That was the title of a 1990s play by Tony Kirshner that was later adapted in 2003 as an HBO miniseries. The play and the film series, set at the height of the AIDS pandemic, offers tales of people whose lives were disrupted by disease and cultural conflict. In the stories, we see characters slide into isolation and loneliness. The angels in the title visit the characters and serve as symbols of judgment and an opportunity to reclaim purity. Such seem apt symbols for our time. Now, angels are not in the least bit new. They've existed in numerous faith traditions throughout history and are usually seen as messengers between the divine and humanity. The word is derived from the Latin word angelus, literally meaning messenger. In the book of Daniel, in the Hebrew Bible, we hear of Gabriel, God's primary messenger, and Michael, the holy fighter. Christians inherited Jewish understandings of angels, which in turn may have been partially inherited from the Egyptians. Belief in angels is also fundamental in Islam. Baha'u'llah, founder of the Baha'i faith, describes angels as people who have clothed themselves with angelic attributes and have become endowed with the attributes of the spiritual. I like that description of individuals who have clothed themselves with angelic attributes. I and Brian Doyle, and I suspect many of you, have encountered such beings, angels on earth and in America. Now, I want to acknowledge that in myth and sometimes in the real world, angelic beings are not without a dark side. We hear from Hebrew scriptures of so-called fallen angels. Fallen angels became identified with those angels who were led by Satan in rebellion against God, and they are equated with demons. The Gospels of Christianity identify Satan as the primary fallen angel. In Luke, we hear of Satan falling from heaven, and Matthew speaks of the devil and his angels who will be thrown into hell. Now, our Universalist ancestors rejected the notions of hell and damnation and moved us away from such dualish notions of good and evil. I have to admit, though, I struggle not to categorize some of our current leaders as demons. I hold tight, though, to a separation between deed and doer, condemning actions as evil without categorizing the individual as inherently evil. Our first Unitarian Universalist principle calls for us to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, including those who sometimes seem like demons. Now, there is good and evil in the world, and angels affirm that. Now, when I think about good versus evil angels, what comes to mind is those cartoon images wherein we saw good angels and bad angels talking to the main character and giving voice to the moral dilemmas we explore, each of us, through our own internal dialogue. Those cartoon exchanges offer humorous yet meaningful reminders that the potential for good and evil exists within each of us. Angels can metaphorically be our guide towards better life choices. Now, I'm sure most of you recall the angel second class Clarence, who in It's a Wonderful Life helped George Bailey recognize the reality of the wonderful life he was already living. My favorite fictional angel, though, is the one portrayed by John Travolta in the 1996 film Michael. If you've not seen it, I recommend it. If you saw it a long time ago, it's worth seeing again. It's out there in the streaming world. That depiction of the Archangel Michael gives us a unique, clearly non-dualistic version of such celestial beings. Travolta and screenwriter and director Nora Ephron's Michael does not fit most people's images of what being angelic looks like or on how an angel come to earth might behave. This Michael is a bit of slob. He likes to dance and carouse and drink beer, and he consumes massive quantities of sugar. When characters in the film question about this seeming incongruence, when they ask him, he replies, "I'm not that kind of angel." He does fit my description of one who fights against evil. Early in the film, we find out that he smote a bank, causing the building to crash to the ground. Michael is bigger than life in many ways. He certainly is a bringer of life. And in the end, he helps the film characters answer to the better angels of their nature. My older sister, Linda, before she retired, was a nurse. And like all of us, she was a mixed bag. Sometimes sweet and sometimes, well, a little bit controlling. But, hey, that's what big sisters do. In her work, though, she was amazing. She tells stories from her career that stand as exemplary models of how each of us has the potential to ease the pain and the discomfort in the world. I remember with tears brimming in my eyes her description of how, while working in neonatal intensive care, she spent most of a shift holding and caressing and loving a born too soon baby for that infant's entire few hours of life. Later in her career, she worked as a home health nurse, helping individual patients navigate life, and with one patient being present at her death. She ended her career as a hospital floor nurse, attending to whatever her patients might need. I worked for a time as a hospital chaplain, and I daily saw many nurses do the blessed work of deep caring, of making love real through compassionate action. Times such as these call for all of us to do the same. I want to remind you that nurse is not just a noun. Nurse is a verb. It's both the act of a mother feeding her child and the providing of all kinds of loving and caring. Especially in these perilous times, the bruised and hurting world is in deep need of more compassion, more nursing, more care, more love. As the pandemic continues to spread, both pain and suffering and deep fear spread. We need more acts of love. As we seek to return to some kind of normalcy, we will continue to need more acts of love. As we begin to craft a more compassionate new normal, we will need more acts of love. Each of us are called to do such works of love in different ways. For some, it's been staying home, avoiding being infected and straining medical resources and not risking spreading the infections further. For others, it has been reaching out to isolated friends through a phone call or an email, and even old school cards and letters are up these days. Still others who have the skill have kept us collectively connected via Zoom and Facebook Live and other technologies. Some have sewn masks and surgical caps or helped make the parts for personal protective gear. Some have spent more time in the garden growing more food and bringing more beauty into the world. Some have kept spirits alive and full through prayers and worship. Some read their grandchildren to sleep via FaceTime. Others have continued to work delivering goods, growing food, and selling food, and assuring the safety of all. And then there are those courageous folks on the front lines of healthcare who have helped with the healing, eased the pain, and shared their hearts in the midst of such loss. All of us can heed Michael O'Donoghue's words from our reading. May you never doubt the gifts you bring. Rather, learn from these frontiers wisdom for your own heart. May you come to inherit the blessings of your kindness and never be without care and love. May it be so. Our closing words of benediction are from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude, to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. May the choice will draw you into community. The endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, its chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. Salam, shalom, amen, and blessed be.